Now, before we go and close out our texturing process, I want to go and actually do a little bit of just kind of universal wear and tear and general grunginess, because I find that this is where our asset really starts to kind of feel cohesive and unified. Because right now we've got some nice looking materials, and in their own rights, it looks pretty good on the asset, but everything's a little too pristine, right? And by adding a little bit of grunge here and there and some roughness, it can really start to tie everything together. So the first thing I want to do is I want to try and make our ends of our wood look a little bit nicer and not just, this very fat seam that's kind of sitting there. So I've created a new folder called Uni, and it's just short for Universal. That's just something that I do in my workflow. And this is a folder where I go and kind of put effects and all that is going to really affect our entire asset here, not just various areas. So in our materials, I'm going to take this wood rough, drag and drop that in, and let's just give that a black mask. Now on this mask, I'm going to right click, and we can actually go down and add a few different things that are going to give us the ability to enhance and iterate on this mask. And so I'm going to add a generator, and we can see that this generator is empty. So I can go and select a generator here, and I'm going to use the mask editor. So I'm not going to use any presets. I'm going to actually build one myself. So by default, it's going to have the curvature up to halfway. And we can actually expand this with a drop down, and it's going to give us more options. So before I do that, I'm going to take our curvature opacity and just bring that all the way up to 1. And then I'm going to go and just bring all of these sliders back down to 0 because I don't really need most of them. I'll bring the sharp down as well. And let's take a look at what's happening. So I'm going to hit Alt and then left click on this mask here. And I'll click back on our mask editor. So we can see as I bring the sharp up, right, it's kind of finding some edges, right? We're in edge mode. Fine is going to find a little bit more. This is going to kind of help soften it out. And each one of these sliders is kind of looking for a different region within our curvature map. And this is another reason why we wanted to actually go ahead and bake out these mesh maps, is that we're using the curvature map that we've baked out. So I want to bring the contrast up because I only really want to try and capture kind of the edges there. So maybe peel back the softness there. I don't want it to be super contrasted. Yeah, we'll just bring the softness down that way. So that if we take a look, right, we're going to kind of just get it on all of these edges there. You'll note that we're actually getting it on the edge of our rattan there. So we're going to have to take a look at making sure that our wicker's not getting any of this. And we're getting some of them down there on those edges. So to make sure that we're not getting any of the wicker in this, I'm going to right click and add a paint layer. And let's just come back and quickly paint out these options. So I'll make sure that this is set to black. I'll go ahead and select this guy here. We can kind of see it's actually showing up a little bit on this piece there. So I'll get rid of that. Right? Get rid of these ones over here. Now we'll notice that it's actually really showing up over top of this wood piece here if I take a look. So it's actually just kind of eating away at the top there. And realistically, because it's kind of in a very occluded area, wouldn't really make sense for it to be really worn out. So I'm also going to, oh, right, foiled me again myself. It's on the other side. We'll just make sure to get rid of that because it doesn't really make sense that it's so like worn down. If I come back to our mask, just making sure to kind of select all of these pieces here. Now that's not going to be critical, but it might help you out just in case you find that you're getting some weird information showing up in places that it maybe shouldn't be. And the really cool thing is that these are going to work like layers for our mask. So we're going to do all of this stuff, if we take a look and unhide that, right, on this layer here. And then we're going to just paint over and get rid of other layers or other spots of our mask with this layer here. But I can turn that on and off. I can play around with the blending mode or the opacity of it. So it's very, very flexible working with masks as well. So how is this actually going to start looking now? If I go back to our material, and let's come down here and take a look at these pieces. We can see we're very easily and kind of minutely getting some of that information. And with this layer now, I can go ahead and maybe change the color of it. Maybe just get in a little bit closer so I can see it. And I just kind of want to give it a dull, kind of worn brown look there. We can also make it, rougher or glossier. Now we're probably going to want to make it rougher because it's, worn down. So that when we kind of get to those edges, it's not as glossy. But we'll notice we're still kind of seeing that very harsh seam line. Now, at the end of the day, it's not super critical, but as artists, we are very obsessive about our artwork, so let's take a look at how we could fix that. Well, remember how I went ahead and added another paint layer to paint away information? I can use paint layers to also paint on information as well. So I'm going to just call this remove so that I know this is a layer where I went ahead and removed items from our mask. And I'm going to call this add. And this is going to be a layer where I'm going to start to add and paint on. If I come back to my brush here, and we scale this down. Oh, and I want to make sure that I am painting white. There we go. Where I'm going to be able to go ahead and start to paint on some of this roughness. And it looks really cool because it almost looks like it's an undercoat of that wood there. Now, if I go ahead and try and paint on here, it's not going to do anything because remember, this is actually off of our texture set. So again, I'm going to have to come over to this side here, move our light around, and now I can start painting on. But I don't want to use this brush because it's a very, how does that wood roughness and that edge wear look realistic at all, right? So we can come into brushes. And we're going to have a whole plethora of, artistic brushes that are going to allow us to kind of use them in a more destructive way. So I'm going to come back up to the top. And I generally like to work with artistic heavy sponge just because it gives me some kind of grungy noise. And you can see now my brush has changed here, so I can scale this down a little bit. Right, and it's going to give us a little bit of jitter and a little bit of wear. And really just be kind of fun to work with all around. So I'm going to maybe bring our hardness down. Maybe bring the size down. And again, I can bring the hardness down by holding down Control, right-clicking and moving up and down. I can change the size by doing Control, right-click, and moving left to right. And so I just kind of want to paint away a little bit some of those seams there. And I'm not going to get too crazy with it, just kind of areas that I think are going to be more visible from obviously a bit of a distance here. And we also want to keep it realistic to where we might actually see some edge wear too, right? So I don't want to just start painting something kind of like that if that's not going to be realistic to my scene here or what my asset is going to be. I actually think that's maybe looking a little too much. So I'm going to go and bring this to black just to kind of paint back some of these faces here and kind of keep it more towards the edges, right? So as I'm painting black now, you can see I'm getting rid of that value and it's bringing back the wood that we have underneath it, which is really, really cool. So really, even though I say it's a little bit more destructive, it's texture painting. It's really not that destructive. So I'm going to move on and come up here and we'll bring this back to white. And let's go ahead and just add a little bit of information. And actually, as we see, I've kind of done the same thing now and goofed myself. I can't actually paint on this side because this side is over in our other side or off of our texture set. So I have to come over here now. So it's I maybe kind of screwed myself a little bit with, kind of doing this back and forth left and right side. And generally, it's a better idea to just kind of keep all one side either on your texture set or off. But this is kind of really only stuff you really learn and think about after you've already made that mistake. And as we can see, I've been doing this for quite a while and I'm still making those mistakes. Now we're really probably not going to see this underneath here, so I'll just give it a quick little dusting there almost. And I think that's going to be okay. And now I'll come back up over here. And I believe, yes, I can go ahead and paint on this side, which is sweet. And we'll just quickly do the same thing over here. And I'm probably going to get rid of some of this information too, just because it's looking a little too uniform here. And finally, let's go ahead and take a look over here. And these ones are looking a little uniform, so maybe let's try and break it up just a little bit. And now, we probably wouldn't get really any edge wear kind of in the side of these pieces here. So I'm going to try and just kind of dial that back. And really just try and dial it back overall, actually. It really just kind of is a little bit extra. And we can really dial this one back, right? Because really there's no reason why this one should really have a ton of edge wear on it, especially on the inside there. And I think I'm just going to pretty much get rid of all of this, actually. Awesome. So we've pretty much just gone ahead and tried to, smooth out some of our seam lines there and add a little bit of grunge along the way. Now the next piece I want to add is going to be kind of fun to do, but it's going to look really bad from up close. And that's going to be adding some screws or nails to these bottom pieces here as if they were screwed together manually. So I'm going to create a new empty layer or a paint layer. And I'll bring this in over top. Let's call this nails or screws or whatever you want. And so the way that we're going to be making screws is actually very easy because it's already been done for us. So if I go down to tools, you'll notice that we have this screw bolt option. So I can select that with my paint tool selected. And if I scroll in and down to where I want to go and paint these, you can see very easily, if I just bring this down, we can go ahead and paint on screws. Now you'll notice we have a little bit of transparency going on there, so I'm going to just turn off opacity. And we can go ahead and paint these screws on. Now obviously we're not going to want them to be that big because those are really big screws. So I'm going to Control Z that. As well, we're going to have a few parameters, and we can take a look up here as to what it's doing. So we can change the outer shape from screw to bolt. It's going to be a more hexagonal shape. I'll just bring that back to screw. And we can also change the inner shape to be more hexagonal. And it's really going to depend on what the resolution actually allows and what makes it look good, right? Because this is what the hexagonal is going to look like, and this is what the screw is going to look like. So at this particular view, it's not ideal. We're not going to be looking at it from that close, and realistically probably from this far away. But I think I'm actually going to stick with the bolt. I think it just looks a little bit smoother. We can also go ahead and change the wearing. So it maybe doesn't really show up too much here, but if I maybe make this a little bigger. Nope, really still doesn't show up. But up here, you can see it kind of rusts a little bit, but because it doesn't even show up at all, really doesn't even need to worry about that. And finally, I want to make sure that I am pretty much lining these up, one, down the center strip here, and two, I'm lining them up perfectly across our center axis here. So what I can do is select this little button here, which is our symmetry option. And you'll notice that we have this line down the center. And when I move my cursor around on our mesh, you can see that there's a little red one, pretty much symmetrical to where my mouse cursor is across this axis. And if I go ahead and let's just add a screw there, you can see it's going to do that on the other side there. And it's really cool because you can see we've actually mirrored our UVs, right? So I'm going to paint it here, and then it's going to mirror over on our UVs there and there. So this is really, really cool and very powerful with the UV layout and the texturing that we've done to really cut down on the amount of work I actually have to do. Now, if we want to change the axis from being here to maybe another axis up and down, left and right, I can go into these little options. And you can see right now we're mirroring across the X, but I can go and mirror across the Y if I wanted to, which in this engine is actually going to be, Y is going to be vertical, and Z, which is going to be right down the center there. So we're going to want to do the X. That was perfect for us. And I'm just going to Control Z to get rid of that paste there. And finally, I want to just visualize our wireframe so that I know I'm actually painting this down the center. If I take a look real closely here, the center of our strip. So I'm going to click on this little display settings button, the little desktop icon there. And down towards the bottom, we're going to have the show mesh wireframe. And this is now going to just permanently turn this on until we want to turn it off. Now I can go ahead and very easily start to add some of these screws here. And maybe I want to make this just a little bit bigger, get some more resolution. And maybe I'll add one more, just kind of, well, let's see. Do I want to add it here? Do I want to add it here? Well, let's go ahead and add it here. Those are looking good. And now, realistically, I'm only going to be working within this real estate here. So I'm actually going to go right smack dab in the center here, making sure I'm trying to follow the same line there. And hopefully I can kind of line this up well. There we go. So that's looking okay. And maybe we'll add one more. So let's maybe add this right there. So I'm going to go turn my wireframe off. And let's turn our symmetry off. And I just hit tab to go into full view here. And if I move our light around, right, we're going to see our screws over there. And I'm going to be able to see them over here very easily. So now obviously it's taken a little bit of a time to show us how to do that. But when you're just doing that in autopilot mode, you can see that it's going to be very fast. Now the final thing I want to do before I really call it done for texturing is let's just go and add some dirt and grime. And really, that's a good one to kind of tie everything together and just make it feel cohesive, is some nice dirt buildup. I'm going to create a fill layer, and we'll call this dirt or dust or grime or whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to right click, and I'm actually going to add a fill layer. So this is going to be on the actual layer itself and not a mask. And in this fill layer, what I'm going to do is just hit base color here. And I've gone ahead and typed in BNW so that I'm searching for these BNW spots. And I'm going to select number 2. And we'll probably recognize these actually from Substance Designer because they're shared texture resources between the applications. So this is going to paint our entire asset this, kind of dirty color here. But now I want to go ahead and actually color this as if it was dirt and like dirt colors, right? So I'm going to also right click here and add a filter. And I'll select our filter here. And you can see I've already started to type gradient because I'm going to be using a gradient filter. So just like our gradient node in Substance Designer, we're actually able to change the colors of values at different positions. So this is going to be our darkest value right here. So I'm going to give this a bit of a dark brown color. Again, we're not going to see it too much, so it's okay if we don't really, give it the best color. This middle one here is going to be kind of our predominant color. Actually, we can play around with these positions just a little bit to break it up more. And finally, our top color here. Just kind of give it a dusty brown color as well. And we can play around with these positions if we want to go ahead and maybe just increase or decrease the contrast. So now that we've got just some random colors, let's actually go ahead and put this in the areas where dust would collect. So we've seen how we could go ahead and create masks using generators and such, but we actually have a whole arsenal of smart masks that are going to use the mesh maps we've baked out as a guide to develop these masks. And so the one I want to use is going to be dust occlusion down here. As we can see, it's just going to kind of collect in those occluded areas or those cavities. So I'm just going to drag and drop that onto our dirt. And you can see very easily if I just kind of turn on and off, right? It's very subtle, but it adds a big effect to a lot of these areas, like in between some of these beams here, right? We can kind of see it. We're going to notice it especially underneath here, right? But we'll also notice with this dirt that it's actually very shiny. So to fix that, what we can do is select our dirt layer and go to our fill. And now with our fill, I can go ahead and play around with the roughness, right? To maybe make it something like 0.75. And if I go and change this to view our roughness channel, we're going to be able to see very easily where our actual dirt is starting to build up. And we can see we've got a lot of dirt in there. And it's really going to give us that cohesive and unifying effect. Now, if we want to maybe change some of the values of this, so I can click on this dirt generator here and play around with some of the levels. If I go to I'll select our mask here, right? I can maybe bring the dirt down, add a lot more dirt. We can make the dirt more contrasted, less contrasted. We can even play around with maybe adding more grunge and then bringing the dirt levels down, something like that. And we're going to have to also watch out for areas where maybe this is going to kind of break our opacity a little bit. So in order to fix that, I'm just going to go up to our opacity for our fill and uncheck that so that it's not going to contribute any opacity values. It's just going to take whatever it has underneath it and it's going to pretty much go with the flow. So that's going to conclude our text string for this guy here. And in the next video, we'll take a look at setting up an exporter so that we can very easily get all of these images outside of Substance Painter and into other applications of our choosing.